Which one of the following most accurately describes the difference in approach taken by passage A as compared to passage B? Passage A was very general. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah.
High level, like garbage, really. I mean, this is good stuff. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a principle of justice in acquisition and a principle of justice in transfer. Who the hell talks this way anyways, right?
And rectification.
And and a principle of justice in rectification. But the thing about this is they never actually said how you should acquire property, right? It just said, this is on line 12, a person who acquires a property in accordance with the principle of justice in acquisition is entitled to that property. Great, but how do you go about doing that? Do you just show up and claim it like we did on the moon? Is that just? They never said. This is so bland that no one could disagree with it. Anyways, very general. Passage B was much more specific. It was about a historical example of a law that tried to enforce what?
The principle of justice in transfer.
The principle of justice in transfer, right? Because they're talking about how land is being transferred from one group to another. And they want to make sure it's done right. And then the last paragraph is arguing that we need to rectify, right, some past abuses.
The last passage of passage A. Last paragraph of passage.
Last paragraph of passage B. Yes, the last paragraph of passage A is arguing for the principle of rectification.
Right. I see.
And the last paragraph of passage B is giving us an argument for rectification in the application to Native Americans.
Okay, but the claims made in the second paragraph of passage B, that doesn't actually relate to the non-intercourse act, right? Because the
it's kind of random.
Act is talking about transfer, and this is
Yeah.
talking about rectification.
First paragraph is about transfer, second paragraph in passage B is about rectification.
Cool.
Yep. Like all things LSAT, we can just scratch our heads.
All right.
Okay, so passage A, my prediction for this question was passage A is really general, passage B is a specific application of those general principles. Is that what we predicted? Okay, let's go for it. Answer A, passage A espouses a general view without providing details. Yes. While passage B sketches an argument that it does not necessarily endorse. I'm assuming we did not choose this answer because we thought that the passage did endorse this argument.
That's exactly.
When it says
what I thought.
it means passage A.
It means passage. No,
Or passage B.
it means passage B because
Okay.
it is going to refer to the closest noun. Okay, why is it true that passage B does not necessarily endorse this argument? Does anyone know?
Because the argument is about how there should be a historical analysis of past injustice.
Well, wait, if you make an argument for anything.
Use historical information. The principle of rectification will use historical information
Ben?
in previous situations.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're looking at passage A.
Right. So
Okay.
that's the principle in passage A.
That's the principle in passage A.
And then the principle in passage B says that ideally ill-gotten land should be returned.
Yeah, ideally, ill-gotten land should be returned. If I make that argument to you, then I endorse that argument.
No, I think he's thinking
Oh, yeah. I was
Is
thinking
it
what
one
Constance was
natural
thinking.
way?
that passage, it refers to itself.
Yeah.
Huh?
Is it one natural way?
Yes. Notice what it says here. One natural, one might almost say obvious way of reasoning is this.
Also at the end it says this might be impractical.
Yeah. Might have to be.
Might be. But notice, if you say one natural way of reasoning, you're pushing off ownership for this argument. Right? One way of thinking about the LSAT is an assessment of your self-worth. That's one way of thinking about it. I don't necessarily endorse that view, but I might.
What a way to talk.
Yes, but you see, that's why A is correct. Yes?
So it does say like one natural way, and then further down it says this may be impractical but then the last sentence says, but the original wrong can most easily be righted. So I took it to say that an argument was being made because the last sentence.
Yeah, the problem is we don't know when this way of arguing ends.
Okay.
Because we have, it's the first sentence of the paragraph, we have a colon, and then it's like, okay, so apparently everything after this is this one way of reasoning. When does that way of reasoning end? When do you start taking ownership for the argument, and when do you not?
It's opinion of others.
It's unclear.
I see.
Yeah. I mean, I know the word but shows like, oh, maybe that's when the author is starting to take ownership, but not necessarily. It could just be the continued reasoning, right? I don't know. That's the ambiguity. Now we have to compare this to the other answers, right? So you keep this open. You're like, I'm not too sure if the author takes ownership for the argument or not. Which ones did we choose?
C.
Let's take a look at C. Passage A invokes commonly held principles. I suspect that they are commonly held, although we don't necessarily know that. But we're only assuming that because they seem like pretty obvious things to agree with.
And
Anyone
also
here take issue? I don't believe in the principle of justice and
the
transfer.
the vagueness of justice suggests that that's something that like everyone knows about, you know?
Yeah. But it says this, invokes a commonly held principle to support a policy recommendation. What's the policy?
That you should use historical information about previous situations.
Yeah, maybe the last paragraph. The last paragraph
Yeah.
does say, hey, okay, I'm not super excited about this, but let's assume that's true for a second. While passage B relies on the views of established authorities,
Yeah, what if
Congress?
Congress,
It's a stretch.
I hope to God that Congress is not an established authority.
Federal government and Congress, yeah.
Wait, what do you mean?
What?
Aren't they an established authority? Why
Yeah,
did you say
yeah.
that?
Established authority to support what claims?
Oh, I just mean like in general.
Well, established authority is relative to whatever it is you're arguing about. Like, if you're arguing that spiders should, or that spiders are dangerous, the established authorities would be scientists who study that stuff, right? Not Congress.
Relevant established authorities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Established authorities relies on the views of established authorities to support its claims. Does this person rely on Congress to support its
Yeah, no,
claims?
I don't think that's right either. I was just
Yeah.
wondering what you'd say.
Oh, I guess yeah. I guess I'm taking the whole sentence. But if you're going to rely on the views of established authorities, those authorities have to be established and they have to be relevant. I just don't think we have any of that.
No, I agree that nowhere it
Yeah.
says Congress. This could just be a random layperson saying this stuff.
Yeah. Are we cool with that? That's the one we were debating? Any others that we were debating in 27? How about B? No one was tempted by B? Somewhat tempted? You know what makes it wrong?
The superiority.
Yeah. The superiority of one view over another. I don't see that. I don't see that those competing views. Answer choice D. Passage A briefly states a view. Okay. And then provides an argument for it. They briefly summarize the transfer and the acquisition, but then they seem to talk a lot about rectification. They make an argument for that. So if passage A briefly states a view, there would have to be rectification. That leaves out the first two principles. While passage B provides a detailed statement of a view but no argument. It does provide an argument, it just doesn't endorse that argument. So I feel like there's a couple problems with D. Thoughts? Concerns? You feel good about that?
Well, I feel good about D. I'm just not I
Convinced.
Don't feel great about
Oh, you still don't like
A.
A?
I still don't like A.
You don't think you think it's necessarily endorsed?
Well, necessarily strong.
Yeah, but that's the opposite of not necessarily.
Yeah.
If you don't,
Yeah.
not necessarily does not mean the person endorses it or doesn't endorse it. It means we don't.
Right, that
They
doesn't
don't
make-
necessarily endorse it.
But I mean, these last 3 sentences or so, like ideally the land should be restored to its rightful owners. This may be impractical, but the original wrong can most easily be righted by doing this or whatever.
Yeah, again, we don't know where that author begins to take ownership, if at all.
Or by blah blah blah. It offers an easy out at the end.
Or by returning to whatever
Yeah.
wherever that
or
is
by
feasible.
like whatever is possible to be done. Like,
So what'd you choose then?
I chose B because it crossed them all out, so I had to go with something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's enough evidence for A. Anyone tempted by E? Passage B attempts to undermine a view. I don't think there's any undermining going on there. All right. Things to think about.